Hello and welcome to the Minority Arts Appreciation Society podcast, where we're ticking all the boxes. I'm Josh and I lead the music reviews.
I'm Mattie and I lead the film reviews.
And, before we jump into the first part of a brand new era of Kanye, the dark fantasy era, perhaps the most controversial era in his entire discography, I'd argue. I just want to kind of thank everyone who's been following the retrospective, following the podcast. And yeah, just let you know, to keep up with the episodes, we're we're present on multiple social media avenues, Twitter, Instagram, whatever the kids are using nowadays. And if you would like to, I don't know, message Instagram account, or do we have should we encourage people to email us? Is that professional? I'm very curious to hear how people prefer to listen to the podcast and
Me too.
what kind of streaming sites we should push, because we're available. We have an RSS feed. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Podcast. We're on Buzzsprout.
Buzzsprout is it's weird.
Yeah, and I'm just very curious as to what people prefer. So yeah, let us know. But yeah, if you want to know, that's where we're available.
And if there's any way we can improve our service for specific platforms, let us know. Like if certain things work better on Spotify than they do on YouTube, then that's something we want to hear. Our email is minorityartspodcast@outlook.com.
Yeah, awesome. Well, if you're really confident, you can slide into those DMs and, we'll see what fate holds for you.
Yeah. Good luck, though.
So yeah, I'm really excited to jump into this era of Kanye. I think this era is why people think of Kanye, like him or not, as like a genius. Like, I think this era is where Kanye gets really weird and divisive, and the conversations about, is Kanye actually good? Is this actually genius, or is this bullshit? I think this era is where that really starts happening. With each of these albums. So I'm super stoked for it.
This is when Kanye becomes Kanye.
Definitely. And I'd make an argument that this album we're starting off with today, 808s and Heartbreaks, which is this big diversion or departure into pop music. I'd argue that this album narrates a sort of death of the quote-unquote old Kanye. I feel like there's a real feeling in this album that he's never gonna go back, if that makes sense. There's a real pushing forward here happening. And I feel like by the time we get to Dark Twisted Fantasy, we're fully done the transformation. That's who he's gonna be for the 2010s.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it'd be fun if we, at the beginning of each era, we kind of rank the Kanye albums so far.
I love that. Yeah.
So I feel like this is going to be the most boring ranking, because I just never going to have the same opinion. But so far, what would you rank the ones you've covered?
So far, I'll start off from the bottom. So far is obviously Graduation at the bottom. Like I said, it's messy, and the kind of digital sound that he moved into, the more synthy techno sound that he moved into, really didn't work for me. And then the next up is College Dropout. I love this thing. It is like a classic in its own right, even though it's not perfect. I love its peppy energy. And then, at the top, you have Late Registration. And I'm not going to let that be unthronable. Dethronable, rather. I don't want this to just stand at the top of my ranking for the whole of the retrospective. But this is monumental for me. Obviously being part of the 21st century, it's now one of the best albums of the 21st century. So, things have a lot to come up to. So, yeah, that's my tier list so far.
Yeah, and I'm in total agreement with Matthew. I won't really elaborate so much, because I feel like I agree with pretty much everything she said. I think one thing I'll say is it really feels like the first album was an amazing starter for Kanye, fantastic debut, and the second album just was that album on steroids. It just really built on every concept and theme of that album, and sonically and thematically. And yeah, I adore that album. And yeah, that third album felt a bit like complacency.
Yeah. And yeah, just one last thing about Late Registration is that album, and the first one as well, his discography being so divisive, people's opinions within themselves become divided over Kanye because of his discography. But albums like those first two give him that like tick, you know, people like they have so much charm, and even something like the College Dropout, which isn't like perfect, it it has so much personality and enamors you with Kanye so much,
Yeah.
that even in his lowest moments, you're more willing, maybe some people more than others for sure, just to give him that extra bit of credit.
Yeah. Of the people I know, everyone I know who's tried Kanye albums, I've never met anyone who just flat out doesn't like any of it. There's always like, well, I didn't like this one, but I really like this one. I feel like
Mm.
there's just he throws so much stuff at you that there's always something to cling on to. But anyway, on to 808s and Heartbreaks. Last time I ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. I alluded the tragedy was coming and that the obnoxious king Kanye that we found on graduation was gonna kind of get a real reality check, to put it bluntly. So yeah, this brings us to 2008. This album, 808s, debuted at #1 on the Billboards. It was really well received. So Kanye's experimentation and risk really paid off here. It seems he really can do no wrong, and we'll see this with the albums coming. Like financially, never takes hits for taking risk. To kind of set up the creative mindset Kanye was in when he made this album, only 2 months after the release of Graduation, Kanye's mother, Donda West, tragically died. And obviously, that would have a massive effect on anybody. It's especially painful having followed Kanye, knowing that information after hearing songs like, Hey Mama, and the way he speaks about his mother. It's clear that she was a real inspiration. And she was really a part of his life. And I think he carries that pain throughout the rest of his discography. Interestingly, I don't think he like explicitly talks about her death much on this album, which is mainly a breakup album. I don't think he really explicitly talks about Donda's death, but I think it's always subtext. It's always pain he carries and feelings of being lost and lonely. I feel like that's plays a role. Only a few months after that, Kanye's engagement with his 6-year on and off girlfriend Alexis Pfeiffer was broken up. I looked her up and I read a bit about her. She's not like uber famous. She seems really nice and down to earth. She was an artist. Well, she's still alive, so she is an artist.
She had no life post Kanye.
Yeah. She's an artist like Kanye. She worked in fashion as a stylist and she's still working in fashion. And I think this is kind of telling given that Kanye later would get a real interest in fashion. And I wonder if that was some kind of real common ground that they connected on, that creative impulse behind them. She'd been with Kanye since 2002, so 2 years before College Dropout, long before Kanye's huge fame. And this is like my interpretation. I really get the sense that perhaps from these albums, there's a sense that she kind of really loved him for him, and the fame actually put a strain on the relationship. It wasn't something that made her want to be with him. It was something that complicated the relationship. So I get the vibe that was a very real relationship. Like it wasn't like a weird celebrity relationship, which always feels like, I don't know, it's a sort of media ploy happening there or strategic. I always find high profile celebrities being with each other, there's a very different dynamic to pre-fame relationships going into, and I think it'll be interesting seeing how that affects Kanye. Among all of this tragedy, Kanye himself describes feeling lonely and alienated by his own fame as well. He's quoted saying it's lonely at the top. And I think this really shows in the album's kind of cold, desolate production and the really pained vocal performance Kanye delivers. In terms of like aesthetic influences, interestingly, he specifically says he views 808s as a pop art album, not an art pop album. So he's not trying to do Kate Bush, he's trying to do Andy Warhol. And this is, I think this is really interesting, especially considering that movement was intended to use the tropes of like commercial popular culture to challenge fine art. I think Kanye kind of does this with his experimental use of autotune. Like at this point, autotune was very much like a trashy kind of production crutch, and he transformed it into something that could be viewed as high art, like really emotional and purposeful, and not just like, T-Pain. That's kind of the context, that's the mindset we're coming into this album. Mattie, what's your experience with this album? What were you expecting? Did you know all of this background stuff before going in?
So with this album, I was expecting a real sea change, and a large part of that is because of how people describe this album. People describe this album as incredibly influential. So I was expecting to hear a lot of very contemporary sounds actually from this. Josh, like you said it yourself, the auto tune, which is so prevalent on this, that I think is probably the main thing that really brings me back to the current time. And so sonically, that's definitely what I was expecting to hear. What I got, in fact, in previous episodes, when I've talked about Kanye, I said that the end of the college era, I think after that is when I can't understand him, and that his albums would become like unknowable. And I did have that expectation of this one, despite being very obviously a breakup album, just from the name alone. I thought that this was the introduction of the enigma Kanye, the artist Kanye, you know? But actually, what I was really taken aback with on my first listen was the humanity of this album. I actually found this was Kanye at his most knowable so far. Consistently, that is. There's obviously moments in late registration that are, very personal. Again, we talked about Roses and Hey Mama, but this is a consistent album, a 50-minute album of vulnerability and intimacy, and not just in the lyrics. Josh said the production is really stripped back, and so you have a lot more time to experience Kanye's voice and his lyrics, and what he is talking about is different. So while there's been a change, that's obviously been brought on by a lot of tragedy in his life, I don't quite feel like this is the Kanye I worry about, of like, who is this person? And that the Kanye that we've been shown, like, for like all my pretty much waking memory of like a complete, like, rock star who's just unknowable.
Yeah. I think one thing that's striking about this album is, like you said, its intimacy. And I think it starts a bit of graduation, and for the next few albums, it's going to be tough to. The issues Kanye is talking about are very difficult to relate to. They're very larger than life, and the issues he's dealing with are very specific to being that famous and that wealthy, and in the public eye. This album many times feels like going to the pub with a friend who just went through a breakup, and they're cycling through emotions and venting about things they could have done better or reasons why it didn't work out. And it just feels very down to earth in that way, and still at a level where it's very emotionally resonant and accessible without me going into high concept thinking. And I don't think Kanye will sound this intimate until way down the line with Ye. This is an album I always felt out of place in his discography. I always struggled with it a bit. But coming to it now, in the context of just coming off of graduation and being really disappointed in how distant the album felt, this album was a huge breath of fresh air for me. And I really fell in love with it this time, if I'm honest with you. I think there are shortcomings in Kanye's lyricism. I don't know how the Kanye machine broke, but after graduation, I don't think he ever gets to the point of lyric writing he was at late registration. But in this album, it was so nice to feel like I was with him again, as opposed to that weird monster on graduation.
Yeah. I did have a suspicion that this would be the least controversial album of this era. It is just that normal, and yeah, I have a fairly uncontroversial opinion because of that. What you said about graduation really resonated with me. I think the first time I listened to this album, I was quite hesitant because while one thing that really hurt me about graduation was the personality, a really big barrier I had to it as well was that shift. Really didn't work. He really didn't stick the landing. However, this really sells the merit of Kanye's new production style. I find it's cold. And like there's there's emotion there, but none of it feels reassuring. I feel like all of the charm and family warmth of the first two albums is completely stripped away, in the same way that it was in Graduation, but you're being used to such better effect here. And like kind of like I alluded to, this is an intensely vulnerable album. Especially songs like Welcome to Heartbreak, where he is talking about, like you said, Josh, things that are incredibly unique to being famous. Like the line, like my friend's kid got a new report card, and all I had was a brand new sports car. Like that is such a privileged problem to have, but Kanye is being explicit there in ways I don't think he was in the past.
I guess, like, I agree with you. I made a bit of an oversight. I don't want to say that he sounds like a down to earth normal guy in some. It's just that, like, his discomfort with his fame feels like this is a normal guy who's just been thrust into a crazy world. Whereas on
Yeah.
Yeezus, he's so gone. Like his discomfort with his fame at that point is so astronomically something I will never feel. But this
Mm.
dilemma of like, yeah, I'm making loads of money, but like I can't seem to form meaningful relationships, and actually the money I'm making is actively damaging my relationship. My girlfriend doesn't trust me, which he covers on the gorgeous middle part of this album with songs like Paranoid and Robocop. Like that
Yeah.
feels so easily resonant. So even though it takes the same attitude of Graduation of like, yeah, he's really wealthy, but it's actually saying something about it. It's actually letting us into his mind space, which I really like.
Yeah, and what struck me again was kind of structure. I felt like I was just experiencing a very like simple, cohesive like album here. In terms of this, I'm not in love with this album, but I do find a real like comfort to it in its like odd relatability. I feel like we said, I found a corner of Kanye to like tuck up with, um, because this is just a very like cohesive covering of the pains of a breakup. I feel like the things he's attempting in this album, while like emotionally meaningful and definitely coming from a place that I find very interesting, aren't this grand aren't he's not attempting something grand and larger than himself, which is what I respect so much about this album, and what grounds it so much is its concept in itself. It is just a story of a rich man like being broken hearted, which is like almost fairy tale-esque in its simplicity, but fairy tales like that resonate. They're
Yeah.
tragic stories.
And I think it's really telling that Pfeiffer was basically a normal person and not like some other huge celebrity. Like he couldn't buy his way out of this. Like it was a very like
Mm.
human relationship crumbling. I love how thematically that story is told throughout the album through this, like you said, the cold soundscapes it uses. I feel like there's a real attempt. I feel like when I say this album's like the death of that Kanye, there's a real freezing over theme of he says, I'm cold, I'm cold, I'm cold on See You in My Nightmare. I don't really like that song, but yeah, it's interesting. And you know, stuff like The Coldest Winter and the production on this album, there's a real sense that he's just like emotionally shutting himself off because he just doesn't want to ever be this vulnerable again. And it feels like going into Dark Twisted Fantasy, we're going to see a much more guarded up Kanye. And it's really sad.
Yeah, and the theme of just freezing over and just becoming completely sort of static. In the song Bad News,
Mm.
and he sort of just says, I was waiting on you, my face turned to stone when I heard the news.
Mm.
Like Kanye is famous for his sort of blank face and sort of appearing almost grumpy. Obviously, a large part of that is because of like the accident that he had,
Mm.
and the effect it had on his jaw. But when I heard that lyric, I couldn't help but completely imagine the exact facial expression he would have pulled. And I feel like that's the man we see now. I feel like what this album represents is the leveling out of all of that preppiness, all of that which became corrupted in Graduation. This is that being flattened now, and what's about to be built on top is genuinely like troubling like mental issues
Yeah,
and problems with wealth
yeah,
um and like just that idea of his expression just turning to stone and that just and him becoming just a complete blank slate from that point.
yeah.
I i feel like, yeah, this is the point, and like I said in the last episodes, this is the point where we never see the old, quote unquote, the old Kanye.
Yeah, and I will make the case that he starts stripping back in Life with Pablo, and I think Ye's a very intimate album. So I think he finds some sort of peace eventually. But yeah, this album's a really painful, sad departure, and I think Pinocchio's story, the
Yeah.
kind of, I don't know if it's the final track or if it's a bonus track, but anyway, it's a live recording that on every streaming service ends the album off. And I feel like I said this with Roses about how Kanye really does a great job at making you feel bad for him for being so famous and rich, which is really hard to do, I think. I think Pinocchio's story, intentionally or not, is one of the most, okay, I think poetically it's a bit simplistic because I don't know what's wrong with Kanye's lyric writing. Like there's a bit where it's like, it's funny, Pinocchio lied. And it reminds me a lot of like Jonah Hill's parody of slam poetry in 22 Jump Street. But that aside, just like conceptually, on a raw level, the song's really sad. I'm really gut wrenching in its portrayal of fame. There's a part where he's clearly trying to be vulnerable and real with the audience, and he's saying how it's frustrating how he looks at screens and it's like it's not him, and he doesn't want to be this, but he doesn't want to be this. He says this line that he doesn't want to be some facade on TV that no one can really feel. And there's a part in the song, I don't know if it's not intentional, it's just beautiful accent, where he says, "Real life, what does it feel like?" Like, you know, like asking the audience, and there's just like guttural scream from some fan who's just like in love with him, I guess, and like, ah, Kanye. And it's this real sense that these people will never actually listen to me. They're just gonna be like sycophants, and all I'll ever hear back are these screams, and I'm trying to like connect. And there's this real loneliness to Pinocchio's story. It's really beautiful, and it took me by surprise.
Yeah, this like stands up with Late Registration of providing so much tragedy just over the rest of his work. This song, hearing this alone is enough to understand how this could break a person. I don't want to sound like I'm over exaggerating. This I like is just simply gut wrenching. I I think the choice to include this on this album is just frankly genius. Like you said when you questioned like whether or not that moment was genuine, it's hard to believe that something that so perfectly captures like an artistically grand idea happened so organically, and that's what makes it so strong. Like this whole song, Kanye is like very directly pleading with the audience. This is frankly barely a song. And they just scream at him. And like I totally understand like being at a concert and just losing your cool. It's probably not like an intimate stage setting. But also at the same time, I feel like there are large concerts where artists become intimate, like in a, in a emotional way, and the audience are respectful, and sweet and understand. There's something about Kanye that in this moment drove them insane. I think the most painful moment and the most sad moment of this song is when he just exclaims, "I want to be a real boy." I They always say be real boy, and as he says, I just want to be a real boy, you just hear screaming. You just continually hear this screaming. and it just seems improvised. Like Kanye's like lyricism, it barely seems like he's written this. It just feels like an emotional monologue that has become now the closure of this album. And yeah, like Josh, you talked about how this is like the metaphor and the lyricism of this is quite simplistic. And it's a detriment to this like piece at points. But yeah, but what I will say is the simplicity of moments like that, where it feels childlike, because like the idea of Pinocchio is just this completely innocent child who like cannot even lie like that's without like it being obvious. It's such a beautiful metaphor.
And I think this is a theme that runs throughout the rest of Kanye's work. This kind of, especially as he starts talking more about his mental afflictions, he has bipolar disorder, and that knowing that now makes these albums make a lot more sense.
Mm.
He has this constant anxiety around not being understood, and you can really, it's really sad sometimes. You can really see it in interviews, especially around the Jesus and Ye kind of era, where he'll say something and it just doesn't come out the right way, and everyone freaks out, and it's just real like I just his constant kind of no one's listening to me, and every time I try to be myself or figure out who I am, I have to do it in front of millions of people who will get their pitchforks out. And obviously, I don't agree with everything Kanye says after this point, but there is something very gutturally sad about just constantly being misunderstood. There's a beautiful moment on Dark Twisted Fantasy in Runaway, which conveys this. Just constantly feeling like your image is being distorted, and you have no control over how you're viewed. And yeah, I think even though execution wise, lyrically, it falls short, thematically, I think these are really beautiful themes. Yeah. So, is there anything you want to say about the album before we move on?
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to talk more about very quickly is while like the ending is so thematically complex and honestly says like almost as much as this entire album does. This is a very soothing like kind of heartbreak album. I feel like we cover so much ground, especially like while still remaining a Kanye album. Songs like Welcome to Heartbreak, they have that sense of like complete introspection and withdrawing into yourself after a breakup, but also like the lyrics of the hook where he sort of said, where I think it's Cuddy and Kanye saying like they keep having visions. It kind of adds that like edge of Kanye grandeur to it all, while also at the same time, like that song really reminds me of sort of post breakup sensation of like searching for greatness to sort of erase the like not hurt but that feeling of I've been left, I am wrong, and insecurity that comes with that. But then it breaks down into Heartless, which is just this lashing out. And it never. And one thing I was pleased is for me, I never noticed it descending into like misogynistic, just like damn woman broke my heart kind of thing. Like it is an understandable piece of like pain and like the resentment that we can all feel towards that person, and it is okay to feel about that person after a breakup. And I just think there's like a real poetry there that I will admit doesn't. I don't think the album stays that thematically like consistent and effective, but those first three tracks start out absolutely like stunningly. Yeah.
I find it really odd that you say that. I'll say one last thing for you, and I do think the album stays really consistent in terms of themes. I find there are some songs that are corny or silly, like Heartless. How could you be so Doctor Evil? It's like,
Terrible
come on, dude.
lyric.
But I do think like even I think stuff like Bad News, Love Lockdown, all of these amazing. All of these are kind of expressing feelings of like the money isn't really worth it, and I don't understand why this relationship ended. I wish I could have done more. I don't think he really strays too far from the concept here.
Though the album definitely stays like thematically consistent. I think it's like there's something about those three opening tracks that I feel like there's such an amazing chronicling of the feelings you go through in a breakup, sort of in chronological succession. Um, but you're definitely right. Like the
Yeah.
album is incredibly like well ironed into being about heartbreak.
Yeah. Before we move on to these favorite tracks, I just want to say how much I adore the first track, "Say You Will." It's not in my list, but I really adore the song. It has this draining, monotonous beeping throughout, which sounds like hospital equipment, life support, and this is kind of what I mean when I say I feel like his mother's death is underlining a lot of the emotions, even though it's not explicitly talked about. And I find Kanye singing his so heart wrenching, and it was I'm always taken by surprise by the song. It really moves me. Anyway, so yeah, favorite and least favorite tracks. I'll let you start. What are your favorite? What are your least favorite? And would you recommend 808s and Heartbreaks?
This is real sad, boy. Yeah, it's such a sad album. Oh fuck. Yeah. To keep in theme. It's so hard. I have decided. I have to put Pinocchio Story. This is one of the Kanye songs that again instills that idea of this is a pained person, and while I now I view him as probably not a great person at all, it again keeps me involved in that discussion. This is a song that makes me that when people carry on talking like, "Ah, oh, is he that bad though? Like, or is he good? Is he still talented? Can we still talk about his talent?" This is one of those songs where I go, that conversation is still worth it because of the contributions he's made in the past. So this just has to be there. Yeah, next, Josh, you said it all. Say You Will, is beautiful. The first time I listened to it, I wasn't sure about the outro or about the track in general. And that kind of became, like I said, on my first listen, I was quite skeptical. I found like that the sort of essentially like 3 minutes of just the instrumental playing until it fades away, meandering, and what happened in the first half not that engaging. But upon re-listen, it's heartbreaking. I think what gets me most about this song is the pleading. I've talked a lot about vulnerability in this review, and this is where this song is really where a lot of that comes from. Not only do we not hear Kanye singing a lot, it is auto-tuned, but Kanye's voice isn't, like a sellout. I mean, it's not a showstopper, but that kind of helps in this moment. The fact that is just reduced to his weakest point, and he sounds beautiful. He even in this moment of weakness, there's so much tragedy to this song, and now that 3 minute instrumental section just feels like his energy has been expunged and there's nothing left. And now all we have is the pain that comes with the breakup, and that's the rest of the album where he goes through that roller coaster emotions. Unfortunately, there's no closure, there's no respite that comes from a normal breakup. And finally, on a less, I guess, sonically lighter note, I adore Paranoid. This song did take me by surprise the first time I listened to it. Obviously, being one of the probably I would say most upbeat song on the album, but it's not simplistic. There's the lyrics of like for example, he talks about they're like on a night out and his partner becomes like worried about something and he's like, "Oh, you're just gonna like ruin the vibe of another night out, okay?" And it really hammers home the difficulty of just a failing relationship, of just something being fun and enjoyable, and it's no one's fault, but even the fun things and the things that brought you together are horrible now. And I think it contrasts beautifully against this like really upbeat tune and really gives a sense that Kanye is just trying to find the best in this dark time. And finally, my least favorite track is RoboCop. Josh has talked a lot about like the corny elements of this album, and I find RoboCop like, yeah, it's too much. It really feels like a moment where he like was led off the chain, he let himself off the chain a bit too much, and just like, if I'm honest, I don't quite understand the metaphor of you're moving like a RoboCop. I like, this is a really like palpable heartbreak album, and so for him to come along gleefully singing "You're moving like a RoboCop," I was what? So yeah, that's all I have to say about that one. It's confusing and muddied and really out of place. So yeah, and finally, would I recommend this? I would absolutely recommend this. This is a really powerful album. Pinocchio Story alone sells this album, but I've said enough about that. This is like an essential piece of knowing Kanye throughout his discography, especially ending this era, because while, like I said, this is still part of the understandable era of Kanye, I feel like this is very, very much a part of, like Josh said, transition into the Kanye that we know today. And sonically, it's beautiful, and I think there's a certain soothingness, like I mentioned, to heartbreak albums and breakup albums. We've all been there, and I think that feeling of airing out that laundry never becomes barren. So yeah, I'd absolutely recommend this.
Okay, so before I move on to mine, I would just like to defend RoboCop. Track 5 to track 9 are like euphoric for me and one of my favorite runs in any Kanye album. I would like to say I find RoboCop boundlessly endearing. I love the electronically tinged orchestration that comes in as the song explodes. I think it's impeccably produced, and you moving like a RoboCop. It's silly and playful and childish. I love it so much. I think that the spoiled little LA girl line is a little bit sus and unfortunately condescending, but I still think it's really beautifully delivered, and I adore Kanye's tender vocal performance.
I think he just play in with that bit. I think he did play in.
Haha, that was a good one. Like, I love how playful this song is, and I think it adds much needed levity to an album with songs like Pinocchio Story and Say You Will. I think we needed this fun moment before Streetlights just kills us. Anyway, so my favorite tracks, and segued in almost. My favorite track on this album is Streetlights. It's really, for me, it was the come down of the magnificent run in the middle of the album. It's another iconic Kanye Lights song, and it's easily one of my favorite Kanye tracks, and absolutely my favorite on the album. Kanye's singing is faintly tinged with a pained distortion, which I find to be wonderful. Its warm and fuzzy quality is really nice, contrasting the dizzying, cold piano-led instrumental. The imagery of Kanye's like disassociation with the streetlights glowing happen to be just moments passing in front of me. His just inability to be present anymore because he's in so much pain. I found really tender and gorgeous, and it really captures kind of the feeling of riding around a city at night, lost in thought, thinking about lost lovers. I just find this track immensely satisfying on every level. So I think this is an incredible song. I love the cascading pianos, the wistful background vocals. I just adore everything about this track.
Close runner up for favorite, I promise.
No problem. Paranoid is another absolute favorite of mine. Mattie said a lot of the things I like about this song, so I won't repeat them. However, one thing I like to say is that this is a really great example of Kanye not only successfully transitioning into synth pop, but honestly rivaling the top synth pop artist with this song. I think this song is impeccably produced, really fun, really evocative. I think this is up there with stuff like Hot Chip, and yeah, I just love this track.
The hook is so sticky.
So great.
Oh my god.
And lastly, my last favorite track is Love Lockdown. I absolutely adore this track. I'm using that word a lot today, or at least in this review. I love the throbbing bass, the pianos, the marching drums. I think it's an excellently composed and theatrical track. I love Kanye's heavily distorted voice as he says like system overload. Again, it kind of has that roboticness, him becoming ice, losing his kind of not wanting to be vulnerable anymore. I think his singing voice is gorgeous throughout this album. I'm really surprised that he's really singing and it's kind of going over really well.
I love his singing on this.
Yeah.
It really grounds him.
Yeah, and I love the instrumental explosion at the end of the song. It reminds me a lot of Yoko Kanno's work on Cowboy Bebop soundtrack. Very grand, but yet somehow still intimate. My least favorite track is hands down See You in My Nightmares with that corny Alice Cooper title. And it's so bad that I can't even decide if I think it's genius or not. Lil Wayne sounds so awful on the song that I can't tell if this is just avant-garde. You know, this is just like
I hate Lil Wayne.
Lil Wayne's on a different level intellectually of singing.
I think Lil Wayne might be the most barren artist of the 21st century. I hate him.
Oh man, when he says we were once a fairy tale, but this is farewell. It's just so like nasally and gross and really.
I don't think he feels emotion.
It really gut punches any emotional momentum this album is building up. It really wins the album.
He keeps showing up on really like sweet albums, like when he shows up in Flower Boy, and he just sings this like disgusting, like vulgar verse as well. Sorry, a Lil Wayne senses a tingling.
I love Lil Wayne on Flower Boy, so I will not take this criticism lightly.
I have no patience.
That's a bad track. And kind of I like the kind of one thing I like about it is thematically and adds to the theme of Kanye's denial and satire of his like crumbling ego and covering up with his trademark bravado, which will become his entire persona in the coming album. And yeah, with that line, okay, I'm gonna go back on my grind. You do you, and I'm just gonna do mine. You do you, because I'm gonna be fine. Okay, I got you out of my mind. It's just so like stupidly
so bullshit.
Simplistic. Yeah, it's so bullshit, and I find that really funny. But other than that, really bad song. Overall, I'd give this album a very strong recommend. I think it's held back slightly by Kanye's shortcomings as a lyricist and odd choices of features here and there, and kind of tonal jarring moments. But this is a revelation of an album, especially after graduation, and it's so nice to be back in enjoying listening Kanye. So yeah, that pretty much wraps it up.
Shout out to that Jeezy feature. It is fucking terrible.
Yeah, I did bring that up, but I have no idea what was going on there. But anyway, what are we discussing next week? What's happening next week, Matty?
Oh, yeah, next week we'll be back to our movie reviews. Business as usual over there. I'm taking some inspiration from our boys at Red Letter Media with this one. They have their series Half in the Bag, which we love, and the whole internet loves. And sometimes they just sit back and they just talk about what's new to Netflix. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna sit back, we're gonna repair some VCRs, and we're gonna talk about two films called The Platform and The Silence of the Marsh, both new to Netflix. Both look interesting, and yeah, maybe one of us will weirdly like them. Maybe Mr. Plinkett will come in and tell us to to repair his Night Court tape. Who knows?
All right. I don't keep up with what the kids are watching on Netflix these days. I don't know any films.
I was just like, I want to do this. This is the theme, and I found two Netflix films.
I will go in with an open mind. So yeah, catch us next week with those film reviews, and in a couple of weeks we'll be back with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Huge album, so that'll be fun to talk about. Yeah, again, you can catch us on social sites. You know, we're on Twitter at Minority Arts Podcast, and we're on Instagram at Minority Arts Podcast, but this time with underscores in between each word. And yeah, follow us to get updates on future reviews. So until then, I'll see you in my nightmares.
Thanks very much for listening. Bye.